going on? This is Tanner Ingram with FlyRide RC. I'm going to be doing a Nitro rebuild video today. This video pretty much will apply to any Nitro engine. I'm going to be rebuilding specifically an OS55. While I'm in there, I'm going to swap out the ring and bearings. Anytime I have an engine open, I always do the ring and rear bearing. And we're also going to swap out the sleeve, piston, conrod, and the piston pin. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Alright, first up, you want to get yourself a nice ice cold beverage. I've chose Yuengling, as it goes very well with Nitro. But get your preference there to help you through this. Next steps, clearly you got to get your engine out of the helicopter, and we need to get this clutch stack off. So the first step is going to be take off the back plate, which I've already done here. It's just 4 screws out of the back. And then some clutch stacks are different than others, but this is from a raw 580. So check the manual if you can't figure it out, but all I've got to do is take out these 2 screws, which I've removed, lock the crank, and unscrew this nut on the top, which we'll do right now. You can get this crank lock pretty much anywhere in your hobby shop. I got mine from A Main. It's for a 50 and a 55. And this whole clutch stack just threads right off. Easy enough. And next up, we will go ahead and remove the head. Alright, now we got to break down the rest of the engine. This will be a pretty quick process. I usually start with taking out the sleeve. This one will come out, I can already feel it, it'll be relatively easy to get out if it isn't coming out and it's pretty stuck. I've seen people put a zip tie tail in here and close the piston to get it out. Kind of dangerous, it could tear it up, you never know. I have done it, not gonna lie, but you can also get a heat gun and just go around the top and it'll come right out for you. So I'll go ahead, oh maybe I will need a heat gun, we'll see. Good gosh. There we go. Sleeve is coming out. Put that to the side. Now you can get your piston out. Just put it top dead center. And the conrod will slide right off. And don't take it out too fast. We got to look at the direction when it comes out. So I got mine off. Just pulled it out and it barely comes out. And I just pushed it up and pulled it out. So when you get it out, pay attention to which side the port is on. You can see that this side goes towards the front of the engine. And you can also look at the conrod, and on the side that went in towards the engine, I don't even know if you're going to see this on camera, there's a chamfer on the conrod, and the back part is smooth. So very important when you're putting this back in to get this the right way. This is a 55, so I also know that the pin for the ring is on the front corner going towards the front of the engine. I just know that because I've done this before, but take note to all the little things on this so when you put it back in, you don't put it in backwards because that would be catastrophic. Next up, we'll go ahead and take our carburetor off. This is a pretty easy step. I think I needed 2. Yep. And this threads through 2 pieces, and the piece on the opposite side is the only part that does threads, and it clamps down the carb. So pretty long screw comes out of there. Your carburetor should come loose. These pieces, you can see them in there. 2 little black pieces right there. I'm just gonna slide them out, shoot them out. And there are little gaskets on here, so we'll clean these off here in just a moment. Put that to the side as well. And the last step here is gonna be, well, I gotta take these 2 screws out. I'll do that off camera and probably clean it up a little bit because we're gonna put this in the oven in a second. You gotta get your crank out. So we'll see if it pushes through. A little bit. we go. Not great to hit it like I just did. If you can get it out another way, it's probably better for it. These things are pretty durable. I'm not too worried about it. And now we have it pretty much ready to go in the oven. You can look at the rear bearing there. Doesn't feel terrible, actually. It doesn't look good. Looks a little rusty. Front bearing, of course, these rarely go bad. So next step is to fire up the oven. My preferred method is the oven at 400 degrees for about 15 minutes. You don't have to use this method. You can use a grill and put it on top of the grill, maybe on top of some aluminum foil. That would work if you want to get it out of the house, because this thing will be a little bit stinky. You can clean it out with some rubbing alcohol or wipe it down, so your house doesn't smell like, you know, burnt nitro, because this thing is going to be smoking a little bit. You can also get a heat gun, which I don't like doing, but it's always an option if you need to do it. And you just heat up right where the bearings are until they come out. I don't like doing that method because it heats and contracts the material. It's not really healthy for it, so the oven is my go-to. After 15 minutes, I'll take it out with an oven mitt, of course. This thing's going to be screaming hot and smoking. And hit it on the counter and see if it comes out. If it doesn't come out, I put it back in the oven for another 5 minutes and then take it out and retry. Usually once the back one comes out this way. Once it comes out, the front one might fall out, but it's a little bit stubborn. I usually will get the back one out first just by hitting the counter, and then I'll get something to punch out the front. And actually I'm going to use my glow plug driver here in just a moment to push it out if I need to. So 400 degrees, 15 minutes. Be right back. Cooking a little nitro. All right, while our case is cooking in the oven, this is when I usually take some time to look at some of the other parts. Things to look for, I'll look at the piston and see if there are any vertical marks or vertical scratches almost up and down on the side, or, you know, big spots that aren't flat that are clearly something is dug into the side of the piston. That's what I look for on the side. On the top, I look for little pin-sized holes. I don't see any on this one so far. It's a little yellow, but we'll clean that off with some mothers and be good to go. I think we can reuse this guy, but I'll still make a little video making this exact piece with new parts here in just a moment to demonstrate it for the video. We're also going to look at the sleeve. What I'm looking for here is, again, you know, any scratches or big marks on the inside of it or on the outside. That'd be rare, but, you know, analyze it and really get close to it and look and see if there are vertical lines, vertical scratches in this guy. If there are, you can get a brake honer and hone it out a little bit if you need to, or just replace it. That's what I usually do. But if it looks good, we'll clean it off here in a moment and slap it back in the helicopter. I plan on reusing both of these. One other thing to check I forgot to mention earlier, look in the top of your head and look for little micro-sized pinholes like we were in the piston on top of this. It's probably a sign that your engine was running a little lean and you probably will have to replace it. But this one looks pretty good, so we're going to put some mothers on it and clean it up. Alright, let's say you are going to replace your piston and sleeve. I'll show you how to make the new one if you order some new parts. Alright, so to start, we got to figure out which way the front of the piston is. And again, it's got this port on the front. That's the front of the engine. Also the front of the engine, on the con rod, there is a chamfer on the part that goes to the front. I'll try to get this on camera for you. You can kind of see a little bit of a chamfer there. Backside is flat. So we're going to put the chamfer on the side with the port. Put it right up in there. Next, we'll simply put our pin in. And that's the easy part. And we get to put the clips in. This is interesting if you've never done it before. So these pins, get it on camera. There we go. You can see the pin has one side is just one side is completely bent in up here on the top. So we're going to use the other side to go in. I found that's a little bit easier. Alright, so once you get it in there, you kind of have to play with it a little bit. Rotate it around to make sure it's in the groove. You don't want this to fall out. And rotate it so the curly part is down at the bottom pointing up, as you can see here. And I'm about to do the other one now. I'm going to kind of put the non-curly end in first. Try. Kind of compress it and get it in. So I think I have it in there. I'm going to rotate it to make sure. Nope, I don't have it in there. So that's why you check. I think it's in there. We'll see now. Alright, so I'm rotating it. It's not coming out of there, so I'll rotate it so the curly part's at the bottom. And that is it to make the new piston. Again, once you get it together, make sure the chamfer is on the front with the port. And you are good to go. All right, it's been about 15 minutes. We're gonna take this out and try to get the bearings out. See it's smoking just a little bit. Grab it. Got the front bearing, the rear bearing out. Now I'll get my, look at that bearing smoking. I don't know if you can see it on the camera. Grab it one more time. I'll put the glow plug wrench up in there. There we go, push right out. So we got both bearings out. They're still screaming hot. You can leave your oven or grill on. We're going to come back to it after we clean this out, but we'll let this cool for just a moment. All right, next we're gonna prep some stuff to get cleaned off. I'm gonna grab, these are all the parts I'm gonna throw into a little dish that I'll talk about here in just a moment to clean, but I've got the head in here with the gasket on it. This gasket does, there it goes. Take out the gasket, you can clean both of them separate so you can get underneath where it sits. We're gonna have both little pieces that hold the carb on. I'm gonna take the gasket off. I probably won't put the gasket in there. You probably can, but I'm gonna leave it out for now. Clean this part and the other one. Got the backplate, which this engine also has a gasket. On the backplate, this does come out. I don't really feel like messing with it right now, so I'm just gonna get a toothbrush and some alcohol to clean here and there, but you can take off that gasket if this is in bad shape. This looks pretty good. There's a little bit of scoring on the back of this, you can see there. Gonna throw the whole crank in there, the sleeve we're gonna put in there, and the whole piston. And the piston had a ring on it just a moment ago. I took it off camera, but essentially you find where there's a little gap and just pull it out just a little bit and the whole thing should just rotate out. You might break it, that's fine, we're replacing it anyway. Just try not to tear up the piston at all. And of course we're gonna put in the crankcase that is still cooling off right now. So we'll start with these and then we'll do the crankcase last. All right, for cleaning all the parts off, what you're gonna need is some screaming hot water, some kind of degreaser. I'm gonna use Simple Green here. You can use Dawn, really whatever one you wanna use, or just, you know, water and rubbing alcohol. I've done that before. Some paper towels or washcloths and some microfiber cloths. And of course, your ex-girlfriend's toothbrush. So we're gonna start with putting a little Simple Green in our pan. That was a lot. And some screaming hot water. I'm just gonna throw everything in there. I'm not putting that in there. And let it soak just for a little bit. Our goal is to let it soak, take it out, clean it off the toothbrush a little bit. I'm actually going to use a little thing here that I've got for some rubbing alcohol if I need it. This is new. Not required, but just my method I like to do. And as soon as we pull it out, since it is sitting in water, you want to clean it off as quickly as possible because you don't want it to rust. This step, you also want to clean your hands. I'm sure you've been taking apart the Nitro. Your hands are probably a little nasty, so clean them off. I'm going to use gloves just to keep oils off of the engine parts, but again, not required. All right, by the time we got prepped for this, got everything going, my crank is cooled off, so I'm going to go ahead and add this to the batch over here. Let it soak, and just go in there and pull something out. Go through and scrub everything real good. Looks pretty good. So now what I'm going to do is put it under some hot water again. Wash off the Simple Green. And after that, washcloth. I'm going to use microfiber for the piston and the sleeve and the crank, but for this I'm just going to use a paper towel or a washcloth here. Get it real good and dry. You don't want anything to get rusty. That's looking good. Put that away. Enjoy my dog drinking 2 gallons of water behind me here. And same method, put it under some hot water. Dry it off a little bit. For the piston, I'll even go as far as getting a little rubbing alcohol and try to go in the grooves where the ring is going to sit, just to really clean it out good. We'll hit this with some mothers here soon too. All right. Dry it off immediately. Get really dry. Do not want any water sitting on these. You could probably get a hairdryer if you really wanted to if you're kind of concerned about it. I've never had any issues. This looks pretty dry already. And the rest of it, pretty similar to what I've already been doing here. So I'll probably edit and cut forward so you don't watch me sit here and scrub things with a toothbrush. When you're in the crank, you want to really get in there, down in there where the bearings seat. There's going to be some gunk down in there. And the final step, I mentioned earlier, I didn't want to put this in there with the gasket. I think it'd be okay. Clean this off with a little 99% alcohol. It's really dirty back in here. And let everything dry off real good. And we're going to put the crank back in the oven here in just a moment to get the rear bearings in it. All right, now that we've got everything cleaned off, go ahead and look this over for any scoring inside, any issues. If you don't see any issues, we're going to put it back in the oven at 400 for 15 minutes so we can get our bearings in there. All right, with the crank in the oven, I'm going to clean off the piston here with some mothers. And mothers is just mothers mag and aluminum polish. You can get it at pretty much any auto parts store. I'm sure Home Depot, Lowe's probably have it too. It's great stuff. You can put it on the pipe, put it on the piston, put it on the crank, put it on the head. Pretty much anywhere you want to use it, you just can't put it on the sleeve. So let me glove up and we'll put some of this on. Put some on top of the piston. That's probably way too much. Put a little on the sides. What's annoying is if you get it in the hole where the pin goes. Done that before. Does not smell good when it burns out of a nitro running. So try to avoid that. So I'm going to kind of put it over where I want it. Get a microfiber cloth. Rub it in and avoid the hole where the pin goes. So how mothers work is you're going to keep putting it on and pretty much rubbing it off until your rag comes off clean, or this looks where you're happy with it, looks good enough. So it's going to take a few runs of putting it on and removing it. So I'm going on second layer here. All right, check this out. Mothers does a great job. Looks pretty much brand spanking new. The top of the piston is beautiful. So I'm going to put this to the side while we're waiting for our crank to come out to put bearings in, which is the next step for us to prep for. So I'm gonna grab our crank. I didn't put any mothers on this can. I didn't really care to this time. I usually just do the piston and the pipe. So we're gonna prep to put bearings in. So get your bearings ready, get your crank. Go ahead and open up a new bearing. Again, I highly recommend always swapping out a rear bearing every single time you have it open. Bearing feels good. And so this is gonna go into the engine, and you want, there's two sides to the bearing. One side has a race on it where you can't see the balls. This side you can see the balls. This is the part you want to see from the back of the engine when you have the back plate off. So we're going to put it on the crank like this without my glove getting stuck in it. It slides right on. So we're going to use this to help us get the bearing in the engine. And we're going to get our front bearing ready as well. So we're going to put that in there to help us guide the crank right in. Alright, so we're about to take our crank out of the oven for the second time. For the front bearing, I've seen two different types of bearings. These are from rcbearings.com. They have a race on both sides. I think the OS ones only have a race on one side. If you've got the one with a race on one side, the race goes on the outside of the engine. So when you're putting it, essentially they both are on this side, the front side of the engine. Both bearings have the race on that side. So when you're looking at the crank from the front, you'll see the race out here, or race outside, however you want to look at it. So we're going to go for this. If it doesn't fit or we have a failure, we'll put it back in for 5 minutes. But here it goes. I'm going to put the front bearing in first. You want to be kind of quick here. I'm going to use a rag to push it in. There we go. Get the front bearing in there. Now we're going to put the crank in there. With the, oh, I pushed out the front bearing. I knew that would happen. It's getting hot. What the hell am I hitting here? Oh, there we go. So we got the crank to slide in there. I don't know if you can see it. Crank is slid in, and now we're gonna put the front bearing in. Shit, that bearing got hot. All right. I probably look like an absolute idiot doing this right now, but you gotta do what you gotta do. All right, so we push the front bearing back in, push the rear bearing out. It's kind of a little game of push-pull here now. All right, so my rear bearing is still not in there. We're gonna push the crank back forward. Push the front bearing out again. God damn it. Come on, baby. All right, so long story short there, I got both bearings in without the crank. That's fine. We can probably put it in there and be all right after the fact. All right, so the bearings are still pretty toasty. Gonna drop the crank in there and hope I don't push out the front bearing again. Actually, I might let it cool off. We'll see. Shit. Use a towel to push it in. Sometimes this part goes smooth, sometimes it looks like this. So here we are. All right, so I got it in there perfect finally. What I ended up doing there off camera is I grabbed this guy that we used to lock it earlier and put it back here and just kind of tapped it in a little bit and used this. This is Delrin. It's not going to scratch that, and pushed it forward, and it didn't push out the front bearing. So this is kind of cool now because I failed miserably getting this in. Once it's in there, you know it's in there good. If it can kind of fall by its own weight, See how it kind of looks like a gyroscope right now? It's still warm, so it's catching a little bit, but it feels smooth, not catching anywhere. And the crank is lined up with the line where the rod is going to sit. You can see it there. I'm trying to get it on camera here. Right there. So it's riding that perfect, not catching. And you can see up front that the port that's pulling in the air fuel mixture is lining up perfect with that hole. So we got this in right. It fought us for a second, but we won the battle. Moving on to the next step. All right, so that was a minor failure, but we got it done at the end. It just took a few minutes, but it feels good now. I would say this happens all the time. I don't know why I didn't use something to stop it on the back. The crank lock worked really well to hold this in the back, so I'm not having to put my finger in there and then pushing the front bearing on. Essentially the issue was the front bearing kept pushing out, the back bearing kept pushing out, just kept fighting each other. So my mistake, but we got it in and it looks good now. And we didn't have to take the bearings out and put it back in the oven, which was my biggest worry there. Because you can mess up the bearings if you have to do that. If you put the bearings in the oven, they're probably not good after. But this feels good. Really no resistance in there. Alright, so now we're going to put our new ring on our piston. Be very careful with these, you can break them pretty easy. Alright, so we've got our new ring here. Get some light over here. So on the piston, there is a little pin on the 55. It's in front, on the front part of the piston where the port is. You can see right, let's see if we can get it on camera. There we go. See the pin there? That is where the ring is going to seat. So what I do is I kind of start it right there. Again, be very careful at this step. And just kind of work my way around. And it'll slide right in. Easy enough. And get it pretty close to that pin. You see when it compresses, it goes around that pin. So it's very important, and we're going to do that here in just a moment. All right. So next up, we're going to put the piston in the engine. Again, pay attention to which direction you're putting it in. This with the port goes towards the front of the engine. And you should also have the chamfer on the brass insert at the bottom there. The back is flat. So we're going to put the crank top dead center. Port to the front. And just slide it right in. This is hard to do upside down. There we go. Nice. All right, so now it's on. And the next step is to get the sleeve in there. So we're going to keep it top dead center. Kind of hold it there. Going to grab our sleeve. And this part is pretty important. There is a key on the sleeve that goes on the back part of the engine here. All right. Now we got to get our sleeve in there. I like to use a little bit of Tri-Flow. I'll just put it right inside the sleeve, work it around a little bit, make it go on a little bit easier. And this is the important part. You got to get your piston ring to line up with the pin on the piston. You can see it barely hanging out when it's top dead center. There we go, I'm on target right there. So when it compresses, It'll be right on the pin, and I'll watch it as I put it on here. You also want to make sure that this key on the sleeve matches up with the key on top of the head, which is in the back on the 55 here. Very carefully. Hold it top dead center and just push it down right on top of the pin. And we are in. And I've got some tri-flow in here clearly, so if you did this dry, I wouldn't move it around because it'll cause premature wear. I'm gonna work some of that in there to keep it healthy. So where we are right now is, in my opinion, the hardest part. Everything else from this point forward is pretty easy. I'm going to go ahead and take my clutch stack off again. I put it on briefly to help hold while I was getting the sleeve in there. We don't need it right now. So next step is to get the head back on. And again, you can put mothers in there and polish it. This one's pretty clean, but if yours is looking a little bad, I would polish it a little bit. And don't forget your gasket, depending on how many you need. 55 just has one. I know other engines have multiple depending on nitro percent. And we're just going to slap this right on there. This head has two keys on either side, so it doesn't matter which way it goes. There we go. You're going to need 6 screws. And put these in loose, just to the point you can kind of feel the bottom, but do not crank them down or get them tight. All right, felt the bottom there. Now that we have all 6 screws in there loose, we're going to tighten them in a star formation. Crank it down, crank it down. Crank it down, and repeat. You don't want to crank it too tight, but you want them pretty snug here. All right, feels pretty good to me, pretty even. I'll probably go through all of them real quick just to make sure they feel like they have even torque on them. Yep, so far so good. That one needed a little bit, and we're good. All right, so now we get the back plate on. You want your engine to be top dead center so that this avoids the piston, the cutout on top. Go ahead and put that in there. If the gasket looks bad, I would replace that as well on the back plate. We're going to do the same thing back here. Get them all in there, just kind of loose. We'll do a cross formation again. And finally, we will do a cross. If you're using a backplate sensor, don't forget to put it on in this step. Here I'm just building this engine as a backup, so I'm not putting anything on it right now. But in this step you have to take the screws off again if you've got to do it, or a glow igniter on one of those screws. You might want to wait and do that step when it's on a helicopter. And last part that we're missing, one would be a glow plug, just to plug it up top, which I'll put in now. I would replace a glow plug when it's a brand new build. Start with a fresh plug for the break-in. And last but not least, the carburetor. So you want to get your two little parts that we took off earlier, figure out which one's threaded, and just put a screw in to figure out. Alright, so this side's threaded, this side's not, so easy enough. So threaded side goes on the non-port side, non-exhaust side, and non-threaded on the other, with the gaskets. Don't forget the gaskets on these pieces. I'm gonna put a non-regulated carb on here just for storage. We're gonna push this in. Alright, and push it all the way down so that the gasket on the carb, you can't see it anymore. And then finally, you can see on the side of the case and the carb, there's a little line. And just line those up and push down, and the gasket should catch. And screw in the 2mm again. This is the wrong screw. Oh, nope, it's not. This part pushed out. Alright, so you're going to hold the threaded part on the other side with your thumb so that it doesn't push out like it just did on me. And screw it on in. And once it gets close to compressing, I always push down the carb and make sure I'm lined up so that it grabs nice and tight. Very nice. And that is it for rebuilding an engine. Follow the manual to get your clutch stack back on, but it's pretty simple. Actually, I messed up. You should have probably put your clutch stack on before putting on the backplate, but you probably forgot your glow igniter and backplate sensor anyway, so you got to take it off at some point. So that is it on rebuilding a Nitro engine. Please let me know if you have any tips or you do it any different. Just leave a comment. I would be curious to hear it. Thank you. Final tip that's not required, but you'll thank me later for it. I have to give credit to this tip to Nick Maxwell. He has a video on YouTube about this, but I like to put some automatic transmission fluid in the back of my engine after I rebuild it, or if I'm going to let it sit for a little bit after shutting down my nitro. It keeps the rear bearing from getting all rusted out immediately. So I'm pretty much just going to copy what Nick does here. Going to put about 5 drops in each quadrant of where the bearing is and rotate it around a little bit to get it all worked into the bearing. Put some paper towels in it, flip it over, wait 15 minutes, and then reapply some at the end. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll rotate it so I can see the other part of the bearing now. One, 2, 3, 4, 5. One, 2, 3, 4, 5. Once it's in there, work it around really good. I wish I had a better way of fully rotating it. There we go. Rebuilt this engine pretty good. Plenty of compression. Work it in real good. And get a paper towel. And ball it up and push it in the back. Any fibers that come from this will burn off when you first fire up your nitro. So I put it in like that. And then put it upside down. And wait 15 minutes. Alright, 15 minutes later, go ahead and pull this out. Check it out in there, wipe off any excess that's sitting around in there. And then finally, I'm just going to add a drop to each quadrant, one last drop. Work it in. And then finally, to lock up the engine, or to put it away, I put the crank top dead center. I'll put the back plate back on, of course, here in just a moment. I plug up that port, close the carb all the way, and then finally I'm going to put some tape over this port and the air intake just so no air can get in this engine while it's sitting, and start the corrosion process. And that is pretty much it for nitro rebuild and just general nitro maintenance. Thank you for watching.